Turtles all the way down. I'm Jake, sometimes Jenk. I'm going to try something different going forward. As you might know, these podcast episodes tend to be broken into 3 segments. The first being the monologue, in which I'm just talking to you. And then there's the conversation, which is the meat of it. And then we have been having some music at the end of it as the third section of our triad. What I'm going to do is I'm going to split it up so that each episode will be either a monologue or a conversation or a musical piece. And this one coming up today is a conversation with Delane Cooper, who is an artist and artisan based in the Toronto area. Well, a nice trek from here called Prince Edward County, a place where you'll find some natural beauty. There's vineyards. There are, artisanal food makers and the likes. We talk a little bit about that, and the conversation gets quite personal. And that's something that, I'm always open to. And Delane was quite gracious to share with us some of the experiences in her life that, contributed to making her who she is and what she's up to these days. So she makes these jewelry pieces, and when she makes one of these, when she creates this artful piece, she attaches a story to each one. So it's imbued with a narrative, a framework, an understanding to give it more meaning. And what she's doing, and planning to do in November, is that she's gotten together 12 women who have experienced in their lives childhood sexual abuse. And for each of them, she's going to be making a piece of jewelry, and then there will be a story that goes along with each of them. So that'll comprise the show in November. So the one after this will probably be a monologue. But for today, enjoy my conversation with Delane Cooper. Talk soon.
What was the question again?
I totes forgot. And I haven't even smoked any pot today.
High five.
I tend to do that quite a bit. This past week I've been, we'll get back to it, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm about to fly away to Italy in a couple of days.
You lucky dog.
Yeah, and to Malta probably. And it's going to be probably a month or maybe longer. And I got to say, this past week, though, I've been kind of, because I'm about to go away, I've been kind of overdoing a lot of things, like, my psychedelic trips, for example, that I tend to take on. Recently, I've been limiting myself to once a week, just on weekends. But I got to admit, the last week or so, it's been a few times.
So what kind of psychedelics do you do?
They tend to be mushrooms and LSD most of the time. But, I've tried some of the other ones like ayahuasca, and obviously, I've done MDMA trips, in therapeutic way, and they tend to be in a therapeutic setting, and also a curiosity and discovery. It's not so much a novelty or a party thing for me.
No, I don't get that from you.
Yeah. Oh, and that's another interesting thing. It seems like, I just met you today, but typically I'm talking to people that I've known, and maybe they've listened to a couple of episodes, but you said that you've actually listened to a couple of episodes as well. So it's interesting to see a perspective from somebody that I don't know. What are you seeing? What are you hearing? What is it? Is it?
I don't know if you're ready for this.
Go for it. Go for it. Yeah.
I'm curious and fascinated with the idea that you are seeking information or seeking knowledge or light. And I'm fascinated as to why you need to be escorted to that knowledge using a psychedelic.
Yeah. Good question. Do I have an answer? Well, I guess, the short answer is that it's a bit of a shortcut in a way. And for people like me, and by that I mean someone who basically grew up with not being very much in touch with their emotions and their bodily state in a way, it was a way for me to get into that way of thinking in a kind of I guess maybe in a safe setting psychologically, to be able to go down those paths and allow myself to see it and to feel it. And since I've been doing that the last few years, I've been learned a great deal about what's going on inside me. Mm-hmm. And of course, you're right. And I think I could do it without this, but I just feel like it would take longer.
Maybe.
Right.
But so is your trip to Italy an opportunity for you to get in touch and seek knowledge without this vehicle? That
is definitely a part of it. And and this is something that I do. It's kind of a safety valve as well, because I recognize that if you do it too much, there's going to be, accumulating physical effects as well.
Exactly.
And I do it more than most people, but I feel like I found a kind of a safe level of frequency of doing it, maybe once a week. And that's probably too frequent, to be honest. And so I did this a couple of years ago as well. I go away for a month or two, just to clear the palate. But I gotta say, I'm starting to feel like I'm probably going to do less of it in the future. I'm getting that sense that I may have learned much or many of the lessons that I'm going to learn from it, so I can probably go back and dip in once in a while. I'm not likely to be doing it on a weekly basis after I come back. That's just the sense I get right now. And so it's going to be interesting to go there. And when I do go away on these trips, it's kind of like a monk-like existence that I'm seeking out, essentially. Kind of like quiet and calm and away from the hurly-burly and just thinking, which I do a lot of anyway, but I'll do it in a quieter setting. Yeah.
So will you be staying at a place on your own?
Well, not initially.
Okay.
I'm going to visit some friends who have a kind of a family farmhouse outside of Naples, or near Naples. So, and it's not completely determined the number of days, but probably a couple of weeks there and maybe a few more weeks on my own in Malta. Mm-hmm. And if I happen to like either one of those places, I could extend it for another month or so. So that's all possible. Yeah.
Oh, I'm excited to hear how you are able to have something that was part of your regular routine and you're embarking on a new journey to really explore yourself and be in yourself in a positive fashion. Mm-hmm. And what I'm hearing is that you're ready to embark on this and you're really at a place of embracing this opportunity. I think I did scroll back and listen to one of your earlier podcasts, and initially to me it sounded as if you're constantly in search. So I guess back to that coffee and anxiety, I'm constantly looking and seeking, and if I don't find it, I've got to turn over this other stone, and if you're in my way, I'm going to do X so I can. And you have that drive and passion. It comes through in a podcast, and it's interesting as the listener to finally meet you and experience in person the openness and the kind of energy you display, because I don't know if I can say this, but you're no bullshit. No. And it's refreshing to meet someone in such a short time. Granted, this was set up by Claire, but to meet you and just, hey, what I see is what I get. Yeah. And I like nice. That.
Yeah. I like that response. That's good. Yeah.
I get to stay.
You're in. Well, thank you. Yeah.
You're welcome.
And what you described there was kind of a high energy type response to it. Although I don't see myself that way. I see myself. I mean, I guess maybe people have impressions of themselves as. I think I'm being lazy all the time. I think I'm not really seeking out as much as I could. I don't feel like I'm. But at the same time, a part of me is saying, putting on the brakes with that kind of thinking and saying, okay, don't be hard on yourself. That's not what it's about. And you have to kind of remind yourself of this. Really what I'm looking for is kind of a sense of calm. Yeah. And, to be able to reflect without... You know what? I was just thinking the other day, what I really feel like I despise in a way, and what really says a lot about me is that I hate being in a rush. Mm-hmm. To me, that's one of the worst feelings. I don't know why. But
you're in a rush where you use a psychedelic to help you understand... Right. Life or whatever answer you're seeking. Right. So you are complete paradox.
We all do this, don't we? I mean, it's like, I'm in a rush not to be in a rush.
Yes.
I'm trying to get there. But it seems like if you don't have to be in a rush, and by that I mean like getting somewhere faster, you need to go there, there's going to be consequences if you don't do this or that. It feels like that to me is like a luxurious state of being. It's like you don't, like no one's waiting for you to do something. And sometimes when I feel like, and it's often on a weekend or something where I'm alone and, I've taken care of, I've done things for my family that I need to do. Some of my friends, I was, like everything's set up and no one's waiting for me. No one's expecting anything from me today. It feels really luxurious. Like then I feel, it feels good.
Yeah.
I can just chill without, like a lot of my anxiety is about other people and how I'm going to disappoint them.
Well,
so I try to avoid that.
I can see that. I think it's human nature, especially not wanting to disappoint people in our lives, right? Yeah. But I don't see your rush or your need for rushing or high anxiety as physical speed. It's the fact that you would like to offer the appropriate answers to friends and family when asked of something, and you're trying to find those answers at a fast pace so you're prepared. So there seems to be this, you always want to be prepared, period. Yeah. And when you're caught off guard and unprepared, such as having a beautiful spread of food and making sure that when people speak, their stomach is full and they're not thinking about how hungry they are, or making sure that their throat is lubricated with water and carbonated soda, So you're prepared in a lot of ways, and I think it probably is worth exploring to see if you have anxiety about being asked something and not having the appropriate answer, and worse, being relied upon as being the knowledgeable one, and then having egg on your face.
I think that used to be more of a thing for me when I was younger. These days, it doesn't concern me very much. And I think that has a lot to do more with maybe confidence and experience, in the sense that maybe it sounds a little trite, but I always feel like I can pretty much come up with an answer to anything. So it'll be good enough. And I'm not embarrassed about, and that doesn't stress me out that much. But what does, I guess, maybe and something to do with that is that in terms of the answers, I guess I feel like the issue I have is that I don't have answers, in the sense that nobody really has answers, in the ultimate sense. And for me, the challenge is sharing this knowledge, like the answer without giving an answer kind of a thing. It's like, I guess the approach is not so much laying out, here are the points and here are the conclusions. It's more like, here are the steps you need to maybe take to get to this clearing in the woods. Right. And when you're there, you might see something. Right. So I'm just trying to bring people more towards those kind of things. And it's not going to be the same for everybody. And I realize that there's a perspective, approach to all of this.
Yeah. Some people what your interpretation of a forest is a grassy knoll for someone else.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And yes, you can share steps, but their grassy knoll is probably utter happiness. Right?
Yeah.
So I can see how that could be self-satisfying. So I guess my next question would be, does it give you satisfaction to know that you've helped someone, I guess, discover themselves?
I would say so. Yeah. I mean, I went to school for philosophy.
Okay.
And that's all about the big questions.
Right.
It's not necessarily about having the answers, because some of those questions are not the kind that you can really have an answer to in a way. And they're really more about the process and about the, taking your machete and going through that forest and finding a clearing. Sometimes it's not there. So there's a curiosity that's involved, trying to... See, I'm getting off track again.
No, it's interesting you say using the machete,
right?
Because my question is I'm in the process of reading a beautiful book that Claire gifted to me, Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning.
Okay, yeah.
And that there's a phrase in there that one needs to be worthy of suffering. And so when you mentioned the machete, it sounds just a physical action, cutting grass, but your blood, sweat, and tears, what is it you're hoping to see once you get through? Are there mosquitoes? Is it pouring rain while this is going on? Or is it just gorgeous sunshine and you're just kind of like a little 7-year-old kid whacking the grass, and it still is pleasurable? So,
or is it dark and you have a blindfold on and one of your arms is tied up?
Exactly.
So you're trying to do the best you can sometimes.
And so it's at that point, it's what's in your mind, because that's where you have choice. You already know what physicalities or other issues that you're hindered upon. But how do you, I believe an individual can find that clearing or find that beach if they believe that that's where they're going, right? And I don't know what it is, but I think those people, and I'd like to think I'm one of them, it's an inner compass that drives us.
So how would you describe your growing up with regard to religion or religiosity? Was there some of that?
Ooh, you asked a good question.
Yeah.
So I was born and raised to a Filipino family and grew up as a Catholic. And I remember in grade 2, it was God first, my neighbor second, I came third. And my neighbor meant family, teacher, friend, anyone else, and I came third. And religion did play a big part growing up for me, and why I also... There's this duality of I respect it, but I also dislike it. And my reasons are personal, and they are, in grade 7, I went to my priest and told him what my father had been doing to me. I was being sexually molested, and the way I had put it to my priest was, my father touches me in ways that we were taught in grade 4 that... was wrong. And all he said was, I'm sorry to hear that.
Wow. So disappointing, right?
If he does it again, tell him to stop and have him come see me. And I looked at him, waiting for something else, and he said, say a Hail Mary and an Our Father. And I left.
Wow.
And I went to the altar and I knelt down and I just wanted to join Jesus on the altar and just be crucified at that moment. Because at that point, life was not worth living.
Wow.
And then in grade 9, not so much religion, Jake, but the fact that we're taught and told to respect your elders, and if you're ever in trouble, you can always go to them. And so I went to my grade 9 school counselor on the last day of school, and I told her what happened. And she said, "I am so sorry to hear that. Well, let's see how the summer goes, and we'll deal with it when you come back in September."
Wow.
Yeah.
And where was this?
In California.
In California. Wow.
Yeah. And so I went through another almost, I would say a half a year, a little bit more than that. And I was in grade 10 and finally was able to tell an English teacher what happened. And he said, "You do realize I need to call the police."
Yeah.
And it was the first time that I broke down in class, and I said, I was hoping you would say that. And so religion was a big part of my routine in regards to, Fridays there was confession, you went to church on Sunday, and that was the routine. Confessed my sins of I don't know what. Pretending that I got into a fight with my mother and completely made up things, Obviously I must have done something to my brother, right?
Right, chances are.
So, but to have the same religion in my perception as a child betray me and not rescue me when we are supposed to be children of God.
Yeah, and you clearly sought out help and
multiple times,
and weren't met with that aid.
Yeah. So now I tend to speak in more, I guess, broad, grandiose. So it's always the universe. I have a healthy respect for energy in general. I do believe in karma. What comes around goes around. And I really do believe in me being the best person I can be, especially in the moment that I'm in. So me being as authentic and real with you in this moment. And because that's all I can really control at the moment. Yeah,
of course. So how do you feel that this has imprinted itself on you, those experiences that you were just describing as a child? Because it seems like there's obviously there's questions of PTSD type, things happening as a result of these kind of experiences. And, quite often people think, well, just get over it or just talk about it in therapy. But I've realized over the years that because it seems to lodge itself in the body, that talking often will not get rid of it completely. Like you have to do something else with your body. You have to kind of hack yourself into dealing with it in a different way, because talking about it is all in the abstract mind layer. Whereas these alarm bells and these responses that you've had to traumatic situations is that they're still ringing. Well, in a lot of people. Yeah.
One way in my body, in my experience, is this is how it manifested. So I probably internalized all of this pain and suffering. And as a result, in my teens, I had really horrific endometriosis. And anyway, it was really bad, resulting in having a complete hysterectomy by the time I was 23. And that removed my ovaries and my uterus.
Wow.
And the guy I dated at the time didn't want to date me anymore because he said I was less of a woman.
Whoa.
Because I didn't have ovaries and a uterus.
You were 23 at the time?
Yeah.
Wow.
Imagine what that would do to a 23-year-old.
Another traumatic situation. Sure. Well, but in a way, you're kind of thankful to get that response and then be dispose of that person in your life because it's not going to obviously suit you. Yeah.
To your point, so I think in some ways, some people maybe act outwardly. In my experience, I acted inwardly. And then so after the hysterectomy, I continued to act inwardly and decided to, I guess, jeopardize my immune system. So I wasn't in a position to, I ended up with fibromyalgia for 5 years. When I met my husband, I was walking with a cane.
Wow.
And the doctor, I had a neurologist, a regular doctor, and then a Western doctor who also practiced Eastern medicine. And it was that particular doctor who handed me a book by Carolyn Meese. And I think the title of the book is Anatomy of the Heart. And it explores the idea that some, whatever the trauma may be, extreme in my case, and for another, it could have been a mother didn't believe their daughter in a situation where Big Brother was sitting on her chest.
Right.
And that was traumatic for her. But whatever that trauma is, somehow we've internalized it and never had an opportunity or knew how to get those words out. I mean, I knew that, or I know now that when what was happening to me at 9 years old, 10 years old, or 11, I didn't have the vocabulary really to go and tell someone, or the courage, because we are also taught, honor thy mother and father. So how am I supposed to be a good child of God and supposedly disclose? So, yeah, a lot of internalizing of guilt that happens from a very early age that manifested in my body and later on resulted in pretty extreme fibromyalgia. I was taking uppers to go to work during the day and downers to go to sleep at night.
Wow.
And managed to keep a job because I happened to make them some decent money. Right. And I was in sales, so I used to sell technology and so all the cables for data centers and that kind of stuff. That's how I met my husband.
Fiber optic stuff.
Oh yes.
Yeah. Oh, cool.
So I have the business background, and then when I moved up here, my husband gave me the opportunity to reinvent myself.
That's nice. When did you move up here?
Just after, 3 weeks before 9/11.
Oh, wow.
And this is an interesting story. So bear with me here.
Sure. Go for it.
So in January of that year, my husband, my dad passed away. I meet my husband about a week later. He is here in Toronto. I'm working in New York. And he asks, would you like to have dinner? And I say yes. But it was 10 minutes before dinner, I cancel. And it was a result of having fibro, and I just couldn't make the 40-minute drive. But I didn't have the courage to actually tell him the truth. And so, as any man would think, you're a flake, you're anything. Yeah. Or you found something better to do tonight, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And my colleague suggested to me that, you should call him and tell him the truth.
Yeah.
And so I did. And then he invited me to come up to Toronto, and then we dated on weekends only for April and May. And May 31st, I'm sitting on my bed, and we're on our nightly phone call. And it was as if a ghost sat in my body and said, "So, we seem to have a lot of fun together, don't we?" And he says, "Yes, we do." "And we laugh a lot and we do this and this together." And he says, "Yes, we do." "Well, with all that being said, would you marry me?"
Wow.
And I hear this.
On a phone call. Amazing. Yeah.
No, I mean, yes. And there's this pause and thinking to myself, be a good salesperson. Shut up. So what ended up happening is I hear again, yes, I mean, no. And then I said, "No, you do not want to get married," or "Yes, you need to think about it." And he said, "No, I do not need to think about it. Yes, I'll marry you."
Wow.
Cool. See you Thursday. Click.
Wow. So was that clear answer, do you think?
Yes.
Yeah.
So that was end of May. And technically I was supposed to move up after the third quarter because I wanted my bonus. And so we had scheduled for me to come up like October, early November. And he ran the numbers and said, "You know, hon, I just think you should come up now. Like when I run the numbers, so you'll be ahead a little bit more money for your bonus.
Right.
It's not worth it."
Yeah.
So come up towards the end of August, and then 9/11 happens. My number one client was Morgan Stanley Dean Witter, and that would have been the day I would have been in there doing a sales call.
No kidding, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That worked out for you.
Yeah.
Amazing. Huh.
Really crazy.
So what do you think about that? When you think of that that near miss, how do you see it?
That the universe has made sure that I'm around because obviously I have key learnings that, similar to what we spoke about earlier, not necessarily to share with other survivors, that this is the exact path towards happiness or a happy life or recovery. And when I say recovery of a trauma. And in this particular case, childhood sexual abuse. I do believe that I have been kept around because I have a lot to teach. The number of suicide attempts I had, not funny. There was one time I was working in Seattle, and I was walking towards the bus stop, and the highway is underneath, and I remember it was 1, 2, 3 on the handrail, and I was going to hop.
Whoa.
And I truly believe it was an angel that put their hand on my shoulder from behind and said in my ear, "You may be prepared to die today, but they aren't." And I slowly removed my hand from the rail and turned around, and no one was there.
So the angel reminded you of your social conscience in a way, and that's the reason? Or did you feel at that moment that I'm going to do it a different way?
In that moment, I do feel it was
I'm not going to do it.
Well, it was an angel, I truly believe, that because I felt the pressure of a hand on my shoulder. And then it was, stop. You can't do this. It goes back to religion. I couldn't, have the guilt of killing other people.
Right.
Just couldn't do that.
Yeah.
It's one thing if I want to kill myself, but to kill other people.
Oh, I get that. Yeah. And that's something, but I mean that you can have that feeling without religion, of course. And as I do, like I grew up atheist and don't really have much of an, religious background. I don't view it in those terms, but in the same way, I would feel guilty about doing that. Because you're fucking up everybody else's day.
Exactly.
That doesn't seem right. But so that does sound like there's a religiosity there. There's, and so how are you viewing it? Is it some power that's kind of in control of things or guiding things, or because you said, for example, like the universe wanted to keep you around. is it a conscious thought of the universe to want to keep you around, or does it just happen that way? I guess I'm trying to make sense of intention and purpose and agency in the universe.
Maybe it's a combination of both. Maybe it's me unconsciously believing that I am meant to do something on this earth other than make beautiful jewelry. I love doing that, but there's something in me that believes that I'm here for a bigger purpose, to help others, and in a way that is in a positive, productive way, and in the hopes that other people do not commit suicide, do not make the choice of thinking it's okay to be a prostitute or sex trafficked because they have such low self-esteem. I want to help people see that they have the right of choice, that they're worthy to live this life. Don't give it away. And that is freedom of choice right there.
Yeah. You know, this kind of reminds me, recently I was, again, back to a psychedelic trip here, but I don't normally have a sense of fear of this universe. It's always kind of mostly positive for me. But in this particular state, I kind of got this overwhelming sense of the preciousness of life that sometimes you get and you think, oh my God. And I'm just thinking of this in terms of just a possible rarity of it in the universe. It could be that, we've got this planet that has a bunch of atoms in it that kind of get shaken up, and over billions of years, all the complexity starts building up, and eventually you have these human creatures that then eventually they have a complex enough brain that thinks all this through. And I wonder, because it could be a very rare thing, like it's possible that in the universe, it's very rare for such a complex thing, for there to be such a stability in one part of the galaxy, in one part of a planet. And, the fact that it's kind of boring where we are, part of the galaxy, right? And where the there's very little going on. We're kind of on the edge of the Milky Way. And so as a result, we're allowed a great deal of grace and time to spin around for millions and billions of years and allow these cycles to form, these pathways of biological systems and even like climactic systems, and then biological systems, and then cultural systems that are built on top of that. That's all pretty amazing, and it might be the case that we're the only example of it in the universe right now. I mean, it's possible. It's very unlikely. And if that's the case, that makes each life even much more ridiculously, incredibly valuable. It just kind of blows your mind, and you think, oh my God.
Well, have you heard the stat? I think it's Mel Robbins who has said that the fact that you, Jake, are living is a 1 in 400 trillion chance.
Oh yeah, the numbers are nuts. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, many ways to calculate that. Yeah, whatever it is. It's a huge, yeah.
And then, so it's about sharing with others who don't believe that they're worthy. It's helping those people.
Yeah.
Helping them see that there is hope.
But it's like a series of completely unlikely events compounding each other. It's like it's 1 in a billion chance that the galaxy is in such a way. It's 1 in a billion chance that you're at this part of the galaxy. 1 in a billion chance that you're on this kind of planet. 1 in a billion chance that maybe even like the sperm finding the eggs. Like everything's like a 1 in a billion chance multiplied by a 1 in a billion chance, and over and over again.
But
numbers are outrageous.
As a result of the numbers being outrageous, we perceive it as normal.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, somebody at the end of this chain of unlikely events, someone persists, and it's us. And it's like, like if we had a bunch of people in a room and we said, we're going to have heads or tails competition between you and I. And so we're going to do heads or tails. And then the winner goes on to the next person, and they go heads or tails. And they keep doing this. At the end of it, you could have like 12 series of it, and somebody has gotten 12 heads in a row. Mm-hmm. It's crazy. It seems unlikely, but it has to happen that way. I mean, someone's going to be the benefactor of that ridiculous odds. And when we find ourselves in that situation, which is, preposterously unlikely scenario that we're living here, and that might be a preposterously rare thing to have such a complex system of cycles so that it actually starts thinking, and it actually starts thinking that it exists, and then it starts thinking about itself. That's the only time I get fearful. It's like, oh my God, I want to just like swaddle myself in bubble wrap and go in a corner, and just go in a safe place. And like, I want this to keep going because it could end at any moment. And it's so rare.
Yeah. And having this appreciation for it.
Yeah. So it's kind of like, it's a realization that is wonderful, but scares the shit out of you sometimes. It's
my question would be is do you experience, or have you experienced that kind of feeling on one of your ayahuasca journeys?
I have similar experiences to that quite often on a psychedelic trip. Okay. And I even have them without psychedelic trips as well. And I've had many of them. And in fact, I think one of the reasons that I'm so drawn to psychedelic experiences is that I used to have them when I was a kid and growing up without the aid of drugs. And it reminds me of those profound moments. And it's, in a way, it's kind of, it always feels familiar to me. It's like, oh, I've been here many times before, but it's kind of a clearing, as we were saying, that you forget that you were there. And then until you're back there again, you go, oh yeah, this is where I was. This is kind of feels like enlightenment, feels like understanding, feels like you have access to something that you don't normally have access to. And it's something that's fleeting, that's going to probably dissipate by the time a few more hours rolls around. And I kind of describe it as sometimes I have this when I'm tripping, and sometimes when you're friends and you're having a conversation. I remember this happens all the time. You have this profound conversation that goes on, and then there's kind of a silence, and you and your friend are going, oh yeah, and then both of you forget what you were talking about.
Yeah.
And I used to worry about that. I used to try and reach for it and grab it and say, oh, I got to get that back because it was so important. It was like, oh my God, it was the most important idea that I ever had. And where'd it go?
It was a fleeting moment.
Yeah. But I've learned over time to the way I think of it is it's like a beautiful woman was in the room. You still smell her perfume, but you don't remember anything about her. But it was a pleasant experience,
right?
And whatever that was, it had its impact on me. It had its influence on me, and I've been edified by that, even if I don't remember it. Mm-hmm. I mean, the thing is, I don't remember it at that abstract level, but the feeling I had of my body having that positive, profound feeling got the benefit of that.
So, yeah. I'm curious, are you addicted to that feeling? So is that why you tend to go on these journeys?
I think there's a component of addiction involved, definitely. And I've said that, if I had a normal life, in quotation marks, with the family and kids and that sort of thing, right, and a job, it would probably be a problematic level of what you might even call addiction. But it doesn't seem to impact my practical daily life. It doesn't get in the way of the projects that I'm doing most of the time. Right. And as a result, it's not perceived or registered as a problem necessarily. And I think a lot of things are like that. It's not until it's having a negative impact on you that it ends up being a negative thing. Sometimes you can get benefits from it depending on your context and circumstances. And for me, it's a lot easier to get away with it, doing this without having this addiction problem.
So for me, I don't use psychedelics. I do mindful meditation. And that's also where I get some of my best designs. Oh, yeah. So the way that I tend to design is to get into a calm state, but it's with practice. It's taken me a number of years to be able to sit and just clear my mind and just be. And it starts off with some sort of light, if you will, behind my eyes. And it's just this beautiful feeling. And then things come. And I think for me, it had been helpful to have been sick with endometriosis and fibromyalgia, and having had taken so many painkillers and knowing what that dopey, awful feeling is like. I mean, to the point where I just didn't even want to eat food. And I love food. So I didn't like the fact that my taste buds my senses were being numbed by this medication, right?
Yeah.
And so coming up here, completely did a 180, started doing yoga, meditation. And when I think of my practice today, I can't imagine trying to do a design of jewelry or any kind of art to help me with a psychedelic and then get to action. That time of afterwards to doing action would be way too long for me. Whereas with meditation, I immediately pick up my pencil and my paper and start drawing or writing the stories for the piece of jewelry, whatever needs to happen.
That's a good point. Yeah. Because it feels, when you're tripping, there needs to be a delay there is a delayed reaction. And sometimes it takes a week really to integrate that experience effectively. And the danger, I guess, in my circumstances was that I didn't often allow that extra time. But what you say is true about meditation, because it's almost like you can take advantage of it immediately after rather than having to go through that. It's kind of like a roller coaster ride, because when you're tripping, you're way up there. And then after, inevitably, you kind of crash down below where you were, in a sense. But when you come back up, it seems like your baseline is slightly higher, maybe, is what it seems like to me.
And that's what I've heard. There's a guy that I've been reading his book. His name is Tim Ferriss. Yeah. And he, I guess, has done ayahuasca ceremonies.
I guess I need to look into this guy. He keeps coming up every time I'm talking about people that I'm doing a podcast and about they say, oh, have you listened to Tim Ferriss? And I haven't.
Yeah.
But I assumed that he was about, because the people that I knew that listened to his podcast tended to be the people that were really obsessed with business and money, and I thought, oh, this is just a way for someone to figure out how to make more money or something. But it's not that. It seems like he's talking about life hacking and that sort of thing, right?
I would say it's more life hacking. He's really into fitness and health, and
sounds interesting. Yeah.
It's a different take versus some of the other business podcasts that are out there. I think you can listen to the same person being interviewed on 5 different podcasts, and I've done that, like Elizabeth Gilbert, for example. Right. I've listened to her on 4 different podcasts, and in each one, it's the interviewer that brings out different facets of that individual, right?
Sure.
And that's how you learn more, whether it's about that person or from their experience, and maybe from that podcast, I can do a little life hacking.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because, these monologues that I'm doing are kind of turning into things like that, where I didn't really anticipate that or intend that. In fact, I don't know what I intended, if I intended anything with doing this podcast, other than just having interesting conversations and allowing my, my abstract part of myself to have fun and exercise in a way and to practice. But it seems like I'm going through without a plan and unconsciously, because I recently listened to some of these monologues kind of in order. There seems to be kind of a progress going on here. There's
definitely
it's
a
like
progress.
Someone's planning this essay here that I didn't plan, and
I think you're getting in line for a book, is what I'm thinking.
It's starting to feel like that. Yeah, it seems so grandiose though, because it's talking about the cosmology and which is the grandest scale, but also the infinitely small interior of ourselves, and how they work together in a way, what it all means. I guess that's what a philosopher does.
I'm excited. I'm going to come personally to get it autographed.
Yeah. Well, that's going to take some patience, and which I tend to lack. But that's why I got Claire to help me out here too.
For a journey in being in the body. Yes.
What do you mean the body? Why that? Why do you say the body?
Without having to be on a psychedelic and actually be conscious and know where you're going with it.
Yeah.
Because I can only assume that you can't maybe you could write a book on a psychedelic, but I don't think...
I think I could. At this stage, I've had so much experience with it that I feel like I could pretty much get by doing almost anything. I could, not that I do, but I could drive, for example. But I could be in a business meeting, and I'd probably be okay. Yeah, I mean, what am I doing? I guess as we were saying earlier, I feel like after this trip, I'm going to be doing less of it. And to be honest, to kind of admit to something is that the reason I seem to smoke a lot of pot, I think, is really to reduce my active positive energy within me, because I haven't really figured out how to deal with it, how to channel it. I feel like if I don't do anything, I'm probably going to be overwhelmed with all these amazing, wonderful ideas, and it'll probably seem like I'm being manic, to be honest. And when I was younger, I used to think that maybe I was bipolar, because I used to have such a wide swing all the time. I stopped drinking caffeine about 10 years ago for the most part, and that seemed to balance me out quite a bit. Really? Yeah. That was a huge thing for me. It seemed that also stopped listening to commercial radio and TV, for example. Like the extra noise in the background. Everything just seemed to calm down quite a bit. And in a kind of counterproductive way, you might think, I've introduced all of these intense psychedelics into the system now, which is really just pushing all the levers way up on a lot of things. But trying to, I guess maybe I'm getting the sense that I've learned a great deal, and I may be able to control this energy so that it actually, okay, here's the thing. I'm either going to figure out how to control all this, what I would call positive creative energy, or I'm going to retreat from the world and kind of live like a monk and just be completely internalized. It always seems to be like, do I need to do more or do I need to do less? It always seems like this is not quite right. So I would challenge you, instead of control, is channel. So because you can channel your energy in multiple directions, it doesn't have to be unidirectional, and you can have 25, 100 things going on at the same time, and it's obvious that you're able to handle those kinds of responsibilities and have simultaneous projects going on and channel your energy. And if you want to take a cat nap for 5 minutes and get back to this, and because it only requires 16 minutes of your time, and go ahead and do that. But control sounds like it's when I hear the word control and someone says to me that they're busy, it means you have no control. And if you're trying to control your schedule and it's that important to you, then you're not very good at controlling. It's really about how do you channel energy and how do you get to be the best you. Yeah, in terms of control, I guess you're right. I mean, I'd like it ideally to be where I don't have to worry about the control. It's like reframe, Jake. Reframe. Good call. That's what we're doing. Time for another framework. Yeah. Gestalt. You're so right. This has been fun. Yeah. Exactly. Do you feel like you're in a transition reframing part of your life, or do you feel like you're along the path you want to be, or you're always thinking about, I need to be on a different path? Good question. I think I'm actually in the process of
a transition. I wouldn't say a change, because I'm identifying what that shift looks like. And I think it could just be because I'm getting close to 50. And
I just hit there. Yeah.
Did you? Congratulations.
A few weeks ago. Yeah.
Yeah. I still got 2 years, but
really?
Yeah.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So I think it's probably part of age. And I don't know if it's a sense of duty and going back to the whole religious thing, but I want to be able to give back. And I don't know what that looks like yet. I think at the moment it looks like me creating, along with others, a particular art project so other people can actually start having a conversation about childhood sexual abuse.
Right. And this is an art project that you're engaged in right now. Aren't you? Tell me about that.
So the idea is so last year I wanted to start having this conversation about childhood sexual abuse, and had this idea of telling survivor stories through jewelry. So let me take a step back. What I've been doing for, I would say since 2003, is every piece of jewelry I make, I write a story for it, anywhere between 1 to 10 pages. So it just depends on how difficult, technical the piece of jewelry is. And so there's spiritual meaning, the dimensions have a particular meaning, stones, etc. And what I thought would be beautiful is to have a survivor be photographed, kind of a before and after. So what does wearing a interpretive cloak of shame look like? And we're not talking about a physical cloak. How does that person carry themselves? So have that photographed in black and white. And I choose black and white because to me, with my eye, black and white never lies. And then the second photograph, still in black and white, will be the person wearing their piece of jewelry and feeling empowered. And it's almost that Wonder Woman put the cuff on, or, that Superman ring, or whatever superhero piece of jewelry. So when you put that on, it's almost as if you are walking and more empowered, and you can be this other individual, right?
Do they call it a talisman? Is that?
Yes.
Yeah, right.
And so I went out and sought 11 other survivors who are willing to step forward and share their story being told in this particular fashion. And so I'm in the process of actually raising funds to get this project so we can have an exhibition date of November 8th next year.
Oh, you've got the date already set.
Oh, yeah.
Wow. That's actually wise.
It can't be one of those. It gets pushed out whenever it happens.
Yeah.
Yes.
Give yourself a deadline.
Yes. Hence why, sometimes psychedelic journeys don't work with those timelines.
That's probably true. Yeah. So you found these other people already, and you've already written the stories and done the jewelry? It's ready to go? Okay.
So I'm in the process. I've already found the people. I've done all the interviews, and am close to sitting with each story to design. Each person I have already somewhat deemed what I'm making. I've identified if it was going to be a necklace, a cuff, bracelet, or a ring, whatever it may be. So from that perspective, it's done. It's right now just the fundraising. So that I'm in that process. But the end effect is a beautiful piece or a beautiful exhibition that's non-triggering. So unlike the movie Precious, where movies and books can be very graphic and extremely triggering for someone like myself. This is an opportunity for whether it's a father or a mother, they can bring their children into this gallery, and the adult will see and understand what's going on. The child will just see clothed people and not really understand.
Right.
And I think that, to me, is the most important thing, to be able to have a conversation with people who have undergone this trauma in the room and have it non-triggering.
So do you envision having a framed piece with a large piece of text beside it?
The photographs would be like 20 by 24 framed.
Yeah.
And then a panel, there's like a 3-sentence highlight overview of what the individual had experienced. And it's through the story of the jewelry the story of the jewelry piece, that as a viewer, you would read it, Jake, and based on your experience, you'd be able to go into the depths of your own safety and say, okay, this is what happened to that individual based on what you read.
And what about the actual physical jewelry itself? Would that also be on display?
There's a couple of ways to do it. It just depends on how much money we have in regards to security. So in a perfect world, it'd be great if they were in a case to be on display. I could see for sure on opening night having the individuals wearing the pieces. And I think that would have send a powerful message versus having a model somewhere wearing it, or the disconnection, somehow being disconnected and then sitting in a case. How is that empowering? It's sitting in a case.
Yeah.
You know?
Point. Yeah.
So I think if I could have, if not everyone, a good number of them, and some of them have committed to, yes, I do want to do this.
Wow.
Yeah.
That sounds pretty cool.
Yeah.
November 8th. Put that in my calendar.
Yeah.
Amazing. So you're also, I mean, this is a business for you as well, right? So you're making jewelry designs for other people as well, not just art projects. And you're involved in a project with Claire to have these charms. Is that what you'd call them?
Animal stone.
Animal stone. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And where they.
How's that coming?
Oh, it's so much fun.
Yeah. I've seen some of them. Pretty cool.
I have the joy of actually naming each one and writing the story, and to have Claire and Peter look at me and just shake their head and laugh. It's just, I know that when I'm giggling in my head, it's the perfect name.
Right. Some funny ones.
Yeah. Well, I designed a moose, and I texted Claire and said, okay, I have Moose's name. She's like, yes. I said, his name is Maple Pie.
Maple. Very Canadian.
Well, there's a type of moose that is in Northern Ontario, parts of BC, and New Brunswick, and I think out in Norway. And they're called piebald moose. And piebaldism is unlike albinos, where their eyes are actually pink, and there's no pigment. The moose actually have, their eyes are brown or whatever color they're supposed to be. And it's the hair that has no pigment, but not all of the hair, just a good portion of it. So they look mostly white with black freckles here and there.
Huh.
Yeah, so... And then, so piebald, pie. And then I thought, well, if a white moose was in my backyard and he was eating a pie, what would he be eating? And I could see him munching on a maple pie.
Tartosuk. Yeah. Nice. You know, it just reminded me, apparently polar bears are not white.
Really?
They're actually black.
Really?
Underneath. It's their fur is kind of like a fiber optic in a way. Like it's refracting. It's all that light is hitting it, and it's presenting as white. But the skin underneath, if you were to shave them, apparently it's not white.
I'm going to have to investigate that.
That's what I heard.
I'm going to investigate.
Kind of makes sense, but you sold some fiber optic cables. You know, when you put light through it.
Oh, completely.
You get that spectrum effect.
Exactly.
Do you keep up with all the technology? And because you're kind of in the midst of that.
In a way. My husband used to be in technology, and my stepson still is, so I still hear a little bit of it. And just my curiosity of how the technology world changed. I mean, I remember at the time I was dating a boyfriend, and the first cell phone he had was a big case like this, and the little
handle.
top. Yeah,
I had one of those.
that was a cell phone to this. These iPhones, right?
That was amazing. I remember the first time I got one. I put it in my backpack, and I went on my bicycle, and I thought, I'm talking in the park on a phone.
Yeah.
Wow.
I remember taking my ex-boyfriend's phone and going to a restaurant and calling someone.
Even if you didn't need to.
No, we called my friend's guy she was dating at the time in Italy.
Oh, that would have cost a pretty penny back then. Yeah.
Anyway, so we did that. That was really fun. But even I remember back in the day, getting a computer and having the opportunity to pick the software that went on the computer, and having worked with a company on dummy tubes. And back in the day, I used to work for a railroad company, and so you entered all the railroad cars, and so you could track where they were going, and so companies could figure out how much they were going to charge for renting those cars. And to go from dummy tubes to actual software was a big deal.
Sure.
And that's just in my lifetime.
Oh, yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it's accelerated change for sure. And I guess every generation kind of thinks that things are going too fast, but I feel like we have pretty good reason to say that it's a little different now. I mean, objectively, there's a lot faster turnover.
Yeah.
In a lot of technologies. And, we have these earth-shattering social changes, and then 10 years later it's gone and something else has come in, and that never used to happen before. And as groups of people, we'd have time to incorporate new cultural practices to accommodate those changes, and we're not having that time to accommodate it. So as a result, I think everyone's starting to sound like the old people from 100 years ago used to complain about things. I mean, everybody is thinking everything's going too fast right now. And so much so that you see all around, especially in a neighborhood like this, you see a lot of these, especially younger people, are trying to kind of discover back to the land kind of realness and authenticity, and making your own food, and all that kind of stuff. It's kind of like a reaction to complexity is what it seems like to me. It's like everyone's trying to find a simplification of some sorts.
There's a lot of young couples that have moved from Toronto to Prince Edward County and doing exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
Farming.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like I mentioned to you when I heard you live in that area, about 10 years ago, I kind of got this notion. I used to have this fantasy about, and I still do in some ways, and of selling everything I own, and a lot of people have this, and it's kind of this tiny house movement is kind of a part of it. And I was looking at places in Prince Edward County, and I even thought maybe I'll buy a vineyard or something. I know nothing about making wine, but I thought that sounds like...
Well, there's a vineyard for sale, I know, and there is a lavender farm.
Oh, that sounds fun. How does that work?
I don't know, but it's for sale.
That sounds more my speed. Less work, I think, than... You can make lavender wine too, right?
Oh, there's all sorts of things.
You show me that listing later. Maybe.
Definitely will do.
I'm always looking for somewhere to, I guess, like I said, I'm looking for calm, and even going to Italy or Malta or Turkey, where I spent a couple of months a couple of years ago. I'd rather for that to be near here, but it always seems so much more interesting and exotic to go somewhere, on the Mediterranean. But there are beautiful places in Ontario.
Oh, definitely.
Maybe I should look at that again.
Well, I think being able to travel abroad to experience a different vibe as well. I can tell you that it is an interesting exercise for me when I get on the train and I leave Union Station and I'm about halfway towards Coburg area, and I could really feel that city coat, if you will, slowly melt away. And it truly is a reset when I go over that bridge and see all that greenery, or in the winter, all that snow. It seems to reset my brain and my spirit.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we shouldn't be surprised by that. It seems like we would quite naturally react to landscape cues, you know. And I'm actually looking at, there's a painting up there. It's kind of like one of those thrift shop type paintings. That's where it came from. But you know, it's a typical landscape,
right?
But you notice throughout history, there's always paintings like that, or you know, simulations of that in various ways, and it kind of feeds into our natural inclination. You know, if you look at a landscape like that, you've got green and blue, you know, green meadows and blue skies, and you know, vegetation, and it's like we're programmed to respond to scenarios and landscapes that look like they can sustain life, right? And the way that we see that is through trees and rivers and, you know, mountains with snow on it, which indicates there's a lot of moisture there, which means that food can grow and you can live. So we were obviously going to react in a good way to that when we see that. But when you're in the city, you don't get to see much of that. And it makes sense as you're leaving and the landscape starts changing, you know, around Coburg or wherever. And then, yeah, it's like your body resets. And,
well, there's also a sense of closer connection to food as well. And so... And wine and beer. So like the wineries and the breweries are just right there, and they're very good. They also support the local farmers. And so produce is, and I know the farmers who are, you know, growing the produce that we're eating in this restaurant. It's not as if, oh, the food came from the food terminal,
right,
and we don't know what country it came from. There's that energy, that vibe of sense of community that I can definitely appreciate when I'm there. Whereas here in the city, depending upon, unless you know the chef and the owner and know how they do their buying and so forth, there's a disconnect. And I like to be connected to my food. This is nourishing. You know, these strawberries are supposed to be sweet and delectable and nourish, you know, childhood memories and on top of the extra nutrients, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And do you think fruit tasted different when you were a kid, or do you think your taste buds were different? Because I think back to, like, when I remember eating strawberries and bananas and kind of like being blown away by the incredible, you know, flavor of it. And these days it doesn't taste the same, but I wonder, is that because they're growing them differently and they're lacking taste, or is it as I get older, my taste buds change?
Could be a combination of both. I know that in Ontario, depending upon who's growing it, with the rain that we've had, the strawberries look beautiful because of the rain, but they haven't had the, I guess, proper maturation time. And so, you know, the sugars aren't.
It's a fine balance, I guess. Yeah. Can't have too much of one thing, even if it's beneficial. Like water's good, but too much of it's going to be bad.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's kind of a lesson in everything in life, isn't it?
Yes. Coming back to full circle.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Back to this podcast again.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, I mean, I felt like my whole life I was too far in one direction. It was all like rational thought and abstract, and didn't really pay attention to the emotions. And then later on in life, in the last decade or so, I really discovered it late. Probably went too far back in the other direction. And now I'm, and this trip is kind of a maturation of that process, in a sense that I feel like, okay, I've gone through that Dionysian, you know, foray into the body and into the unconscious, and the psychedelics had a lot to do with that as well, trying to look inside and see what's going on in there. And what I found was that there are proto beings inside me in a way. It's like they're different aspects of me that are kind of swimming around and working with each other and working against each other, and all of those things combined together is me. And but it requires a rational, conscious, awake part of me to kind of control all of those in a sense. But not control is not the good word, but to
channel
it, yeah, to be aware of it and to maybe nudge it every now and then. Yeah.
Well, it's almost I almost think of it as a sports team. So you have all these different facets. So it depends. When I'm speaking to men, I use the sports analogy.
I can speak that language.
And, there are times when, you need a defense person to step up, or an offense, someone on the offense to step up. And in regards to me, because I love jewelry, I refer to myself as different facets of a stone, in particular a diamond. And so if the light is shining on one particular facet, you're only going to see those color hues that I'm showing. But if I just nudge it ever so slightly, then, you get a huge spectrum and you see the whole stone, not just the facet. And it's the same thing with a sports team. You either see, one individual becomes the star who puts the ball, whether you're a football or soccer, into the end zone, or is it the whole team and that's what you're watching, but it's the whole team that carries to the win, right?
I like that metaphor. Yeah, because it almost seems like when I was growing up, I had a bunch of quarterbacks on the team, but I didn't have any offensive linemen, didn't really have very many wide receivers, and the quarterbacks weren't very good at catching the ball, but they were good at throwing it. So, yeah, you're finding that there are other elements that need to be nurtured within you, and I guess it's an endless process. But, every now and then you feel like you've made some kind of a adjustment or discovery or growth that you feel like, oh, I've attained another stage or another, layer of understanding. And then I feel like I'm there, and you need a couple of months to integrate that and maybe start over. And I've been kind of talking about with Claire and a couple other friends, is that I had this idea that we should get together, with 3 or 4 people that you know very well, and just maybe spend a couple of hours on one of you and just hash out everything. What is it? What's going on in your life? What's going to be good for you? Where do you want it to go? And like actual practical questions as well. And then say, well, what do I need to do to get there?
Right.
It's like I've never really done that. I've never.
That's where, in some masterminds, you actually have an opportunity to do something like that. Maybe not as in depth as that. But for example, someone will say, okay, here's my business plan. This is what I plan to do.
Yeah.
For the next 2 hours.
Yeah.
Let's go rake it over.
That could be very helpful.
Yeah. Oh, it is. That's the power behind a mastermind. And, but I'm hearing you say is more taking that idea and how can we have one of our friends be their best self if they're open to hearing all of the input.
Right.
Because that has to be a safe environment as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. It has to be, it's kind of the input is, well, you're going to hear how your friends are seeing you, and that's going to be helpful because you're going to have kind of a third party perspective of it. So it has to be transparent and you have to be trusting.
Right.
And open about it. But it's also a very practical step that I've, in my particular experience, I've always been kind of against planning, to be honest. It almost seemed like it would take something away if you plan too much. And it's kind of foolish, I think, in various, contexts to think like that. In some contexts, that makes sense. Like if you're doing improvisational music, yeah, don't plan it. That might be good, but
there was a lot of practice and preparedness to be able to do improv, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's about reframing how that exercise will happen. And so that way the expectations and the outcomes are in line. So we're not here to fix, change. It's about an openness to evolve, to be your best you.
Yeah.
Are you open to that?
Mm-hmm.
And, together, that's what we like to do, because if we do this as a round robin, imagine that if we did this and then multiplied it with more of our friends, and you get more mind share. Just think what kind of change can happen in the world, right?
Yeah, it seems like that should be a standard cultural practice
you would
for
think.
people to do, maybe on a monthly basis even, if not annual.
Yeah. Well, I think it goes back to, though, your original question about religion, because we're not really given the opportunity, at least in my experience of religion, to think for ourselves. There's judgment, right? And judgment will be passed. So before you act, you better think about how you're going to be judged. There is no, be open to the consequences. And the consequence could even just be, I learned something. I didn't lose. And so I'm really liking the way how our conversation is like actually weaving back into certain things.
Spirals.
Yeah, this is cool.
Yeah.
But I don't know. What do you think? I just thought of that.
About what? Sorry? About
the idea that religion
oh, yeah.
really doesn't allow for us to have open discussion for openness to evolve and change. There is, here's a story, act accordingly, and judgment.
I feel like religion to me is a technology.
Okay.
In the most grandest sense. And it's something that we create together so that we can implement to live in a way. And it seems like religion has kind of a couple of different aspects. So one is kind of explanatory in the sense like, what's going on? How the fuck? What is all this?
Right,
What is this? And the other thing is, like the ethical component of it is because it tells you how you should live. And in a way, you're kind of outsourcing that. It's like, oh, here's a list of way of being. It's a cultural practice. It's something that I buy into as a kind of a large, grand game. It's like putting on a suit. It's like putting on some kind of a technology that you wear. And then from that, it makes things easier in a sense that, and so in a way, what you're describing is that it's kind of guaranteed that it's designed so you don't think about it. And that's the whole point of it in a sense, is that it gives you shortcuts for what to be like and what the universe is about. And so that you don't have to spend a lot of time like I do thinking about it all the time. Because if you don't have that furnished for you, then you may spend your whole life thinking these things through, or you may start to try and devise your own methodologies and ways of being. And I guess we kind of do this unconsciously. Like, even though, like I said, I've grown up atheist, I've developed a bunch of series of strategies, ways of being, approaches, moralities that overlap with a lot of religions.
And I would say coping mechanisms for myself.
Coping mechanisms, yeah, all of those things. These are all kind of like technologies that we're developing for us to live in an effective way. And so much so that, as I said, we're going through these monologues. It's starting to take shape in terms of. It almost seems like I could think about developing a sort of martial art in a sense, because I'm really just trying to be concerned with how am I dealing with these energies through me, how am I understanding myself and like enacting from within out to the world. And these sound very much like Eastern martial art type approaches, like Tai Chi type things. And so I'm thinking, well, rather than reinventing the wheel, maybe I should just take one of those and use it as a framework and maybe build upon it. So that's also something that's kind of been interesting me lately, and I keep mentioning it, but I haven't really started anything. But I'm taking up one of those practices.
I think you have the opportunity in Italy.
Yeah. It's so much so that I'm even thinking maybe I'll find a monastery there. Like, I'm not Catholic even. I don't care. It doesn't really matter, to be honest.
Although,
kind of a stoic thing,
Stoicism. You would like Tim Ferriss. He's really into Stoicism.
Okay, cool.
Yes. I was going to say, though I have not been to Spain, there have been monasteries. I think you can.
I'd like to look into those.
Yeah. Paradors, I think is what they're called.
Of course, we have a kind of a bad impression of the Catholic Church for various reasons, as some of that you've highlighted earlier in our conversation as well. So there is that, the religion, whenever you have that kind of a cultural structure, when you have control, there's room for abuse. And that seems to be inevitable in systems that integrate themselves deeply into your life. And the reason for that, I think, is because people are flawed. And, that's a large part of any kind of system like that, is that it's functioning off the energy of these people. And most of us are fucked up in some sense or another. And
we've allowed to give them power.
Yes. And then in some ways our systems encourage those people to take power, because it seems like, a psychopath with low conscience is going to be more successful in some sense, because they're going to be able to overlook stepping on people. And that is hard for us to kind of figure out systems to avoid that. But we do. We have checks and balances. And it's not always the case that, an asshole is going to take charge, but usually they do.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Do you get involved with the politics at all, or do you pay attention to it?
I pay attention to it enough, but I'm one of those people that it creates so much noise, it does hinder my creativity. Yeah. So I read enough to know what's going on, but I really have to, I don't want to say unplug, but somewhat unplug.
Well, yeah, there's no judgment there. I mean, everybody's kind of, you wouldn't be blamed for feeling that these days. It's pretty easy. I mean, I get that all the time. It's like what we were just talking about, being a monk somewhere in a monastery. It's like part of that is just to get away from all this noise. And
exactly. Yeah. Well, between social media and, I mean, just even the news feeds today, and today in general, I mean, quite frankly, I don't need to know what musician is wearing now and what they had for dinner last night and whatever that may be. We should, news that I think it's interesting how a particular country is being attacked for shutting down a news vehicle because of the kind of journalism that they put out. And I think it has been quite a fair way of communicating in that particular area, I should say. But unfortunately, the powers to be are able to wheel and deal and continue to feed the minions the kind of news that they believe we should have to make sure we don't have any power, and there's no reason for us to disbelieve and rise up and say, hey, no more.
With regard to these politics and the political changes that have been going on, I felt like when I was younger, I had maybe a low impression of the mass populace in a sense. I kind of felt superior as a, kind of a smart kid and a smart ass kind of a kid. I thought, everyone's stupid or whatever. And then as I got older, I thought, oh no, there's a lot of different kinds of intelligence, and I appreciated all kinds of different, it's not just abstract intelligence, it's all kinds of emotional, started paying attention to all of that and appreciating it all. But I got to admit, recently with the developments, I think maybe my initial reactions were more correct. In the sense that people are just being deceived so easily that it kind of, I have to reset, like the paradigm of what I thought, how human groups worked even. I think we're much more unconscious and animalistic than even I had thought even when I was younger. And I'm noticing that about myself as well. It's like how we were talking about earlier about all these other processes within me, for example, that's bringing. A lot of them are unconscious and of the body. That unless you're paying attention to it from another part of yourself, you might not even know that they're there, or they're functioning in certain ways, and they might be sabotaging you. And it has its, parts of you have their own agenda to be reacting in certain ways and making you behave in certain ways. That in most cases, for most of the people, most of my life is kind of unclear and invisible.
So do you journal?
Not really, but I do occasionally take notes on my iPhone when I get these ideas pop in. But recently I bought into one of these paper day planners.
Okay.
Which actually is pretty cool. I've always had this. It's been a major issue in my life in terms of, we touched upon it a little bit earlier, is like organization. And I always feel like if I can just get that under control, I could have so much more in my life.
I challenge you to refrain from using the word control.
I know. These are the words that we're stuck with, but you're right. Yeah.
I think you almost have to have a pain associated with it. Like for every time you say the word control, you have to throw a loony into a jar or something.
Right.
Because
what's the word then? I mean, it's not so much control, but I mean, there is a great, large part of the element of that control needs to be in that new word or definition, because it is something that is consciously in your sights as opposed to unconsciously in your sights.
Completely.
Yeah.
Agree with that. But control sounds has restrictions to it. Like whatever, whether it's you're trying to control this far or, out this far.
Right, yeah.
But it's, how can you still keep, be up to date or in tune with what your responsibilities are and be in the flow of it, as opposed to, you don't want to control the river. You want the river to flow and get all that good nutrients going from upstream, downstream. That's really good stuff. Yeah. And it just happens naturally. Right.
So these processes happen, but occasionally we put up a dam somewhere because we think it's going to...
You allowed the beaver.
You let the beaver do it. Maybe. Yeah.
That's your other self in there. You have a beaver inside of you that is creating dams.
It's probably a raccoon. Our local spirit animal around here. Yeah. I don't know. Control. Yeah. But I still want to retain some of that, though. Because, well, what's the opposite? You don't want to be out of control.
Okay. Yeah. I have my phone. Let's say synonym.
Right. Could do that. Yeah. Some of them might fit.
Yeah. Because if it allows... No.
Well, lately I've been thinking in terms of cooperation.
I like
it's like
that.
Rather than one side controlling the other, it's like I'm talking about the elements within me cooperating with each other, and but taking into account all of the aspects of it. But I gotta say, the rational, abstract side really has to be in charge at some point.
I kind of like keeps you in check.
In check. Okay. What else we got there?
Well, I don't like the other words. There's restraint, constraint, limitation, restriction.
See, those are all kind of holding down.
Exactly. Power, authority, mastery.
Well, maybe we can just try and forget some of the associations with it and just think about it in terms of its own. Yeah, I know what you're saying. Yeah, control freak is something that's...
If there was one word that you tend to use in this period of the podcast, that would be the one word that is highlighted for me.
Oh, yeah?
Yes.
Really? Interesting. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. It's good to get another perspective on things. Yeah, maybe it'll turn into a book too.
Yeah.
How's your timing? What are we here?
Where are we at?
Let's see. It's after 4, so I guess we got to wrap up.
Okay.
That was great. Delane, thank you.
You're welcome,
conversation.
Jake.
Come by and hang out again.
Oh, I'd be pleased to.
Okay, great.
This is actually fun.
High five it.
Woo!
Got it. Thanks. Take it easy.
Awesome.